Let's broaden this conversation, and I'm joined in studio by Dr. Khannenje. He's the director, the Horn Institute in Kenya. Dr. Khannenje, thank you for joining us on African Live. First off, what's your take on President Buhari's plea for international support to help Africa, to help the continent out of poverty?
I think President Buhari is right on point, but the type of help, I think, should not be aid. There is no evidence that aid has ever assisted any country on the continent to grow. What the continent needs today is actually trade and investment and transfer of technology. I think that's going to play a more important role. Now, traditionally, you've had a reluctance by foreign investors, especially to transfer technology, so that you can create local ownership and be able to produce things to actually export and get foreign exchange. I think that dynamic has to change for the continent to move at the speed at which it is supposed to do that.
So the dynamic needs to change on the continent, but global rates of poverty have been cut by more than half over the last 2 decades or so. How is Africa doing, though, in terms of poverty eradication itself?
Yeah, while still there are concerns with regard to poverty levels, remember just about a decade ago, about half the population of the continent actually lived before the poverty line. Today we're talking about a third of that. That's about 25% improvement. That's significant. The challenge, though, is the wealth is not equally shared, and so you have more vertical growth in wealth instead of horizontal. And so certain structural things need to be put in place to make sure that actually no one is left behind, especially in the process of economic growth. Not to mention that the continent, about half of the economies of the continent are among the top and fastest growing economies in the world.
We have seen, though, a lot of interest on African countries in the last decade from major powers like China, like Russia, like India, all investing on the continent. And yet still some African countries are still doing rather badly economically. Why is this the case? Yeah,
first of all, a lot of investments also going in industries like extractive industry, for instance, which doesn't really give much. So most of the time the GDP is not reflected in the pockets and the tables of individuals. However, I think smart investments that is going to make sure that it employs majority of African populations, put them into workforce, but also ensure they put infrastructure in place, I think is going to help. And certain countries such as China, for instance, have been involved in building massive infrastructure projects, which is actually helping a number of countries on the continent and also creating jobs for the local population. But I think African countries need to think a lot smarter with regard to investment and trade with the outside world.